Join as we learn the second Torah reading for Parshas Tetzaveh, Monday Parshas Tetzaveh, chapter 28, verse 13. The Torah tells us, yesterday we started telling us about the garments that were made for the high priest. We started with the ephod. Today we're going to continue with the breastplate. Verse 13, continuing first and concluding with the ephod, and then starting with the breastplate, as they were both connected, as we discussed yesterday, and we'll discuss today at length. Vasisa mishpetei zahav, and you shall make gold settings. Where these stones were going to be set, as we mentioned, they were going to be in gold settings. Rashi, vasisa mishpetzeis. Miyut mishpetzeis shtayim, the very fact that he tells us a number here when he talks about the idea of the inserts that the gold was going to be put in, he takes the smallest number, which is a plural. Over here in this part of the section, he only mentions partially of what they were going to be used for. But later on, when he talks about the breastplate, he continues to explain in verse 25, as we'll soon see, he tells us about what these squares will be used for. Verse 14. Besides having the settings where you're going to have the stones, you will also have, you'll have to make two braided chains of zav toir, of pure gold, migbolis. They will be on the edges. Tasa isam, you should make them. Masei avis, and they should be braided. V'nasata sharsharis avisis al mishpetzeis al mishpetzeis. And you're going to take these braided chains and you'll attach them to the gold settings. Rashi, sharsharis of, what does the word sharsharis mean? Shalshalois, like chains. Migbolis. What does the word migbolis mean? The root word of the word migbolis means gvul, like the edge. L'seif gvul acheshen, to the edge of the breastplate. Tasa isam, that's where you will make these braided strands. Masei avis, the word avis means masei kliyas chutin, is that you're going to take them and they're going to be woven together, braided together. Loi masen ekavim ukvalim, it's not that you're going to put them in rings and then with holes in them fold them over. Like those that they make for the chains that are for wells that they want to pick up the water and how they pick up the buckets, and they put a hook in it and then they lift it with it and making knots. Or just it should be like the ones that were made for sacks, with they're interwoven within the item. In shayrish, that means that they take the head of the rope and it's woven in with a bunch of strings, a bunch of strands, and it's made into one piece. V'nasatas sharshares, and what are you going to do with these woven strands? You're going to put them, shalavoises, the ones that were woven, hasuyas maisa avis, those that were made out of this woven type of material where you braided them together. You'll put them on these squares. This is actually, Rashi explains that this is not telling us how the commandment of how to make them. And it's not telling us, the Torah is not yet telling us where they should be placed or how they should be made. What is it saying? And therefore, when the Torah uses the terminology, you shall make or you shall put, it's not part of the commandment. It's talking about in the future, when you will have the breastplate and you will have the ephod, and you're going to put these two items together, this is the way it should be placed. The reason is because we're going to see later on in verse 25, when the Torah enumerates and tells us the details of the breastplate, there the Torah will tell us exactly the commandment of where they should be placed, how they should be placed, and the commandment of doing them. Over here it's telling us of what we're going to need in the future. This is actually Rashi The reason why the Torah is telling us over here is to let me know that in the future, when I tell you with the word mishpatzes, and I talk to you about, and God tells him about the commandment about the choshen, about the breastplate, you will know what he's referring to, and therefore he says, when you will make those braided ropes, which are going to be on the edge of the breastplate. You're going to attach them to these square gold inserts that have the shoham stones, which is on the ephod. With that, we continue into the laws pertaining to the commandments of the breastplate. V'asisa, verse 15. V'asisa chayshin mishpat, and you will make a breastplate of judgment. Maseh chayshev, a woven design. Kemaseh ephod, you shall make it like the same fabric that you made the ephod. What was the fabric that was in the ephod? Tatsenu, as we mentioned. Zav, it's going to be gold. Chelas vargama v'telashani, gold, turquoise wool, purple wool, scarlet wool, and linen twined. Tasa isa, you should make it. As we mentioned, this had the 28-strand fabric, 5 of each one with another one of the gold in it, so it was 6. And therefore you had the 28 strands, as we discussed when we came to the ephod. Rashi, Chayshe Mishpat, why was it called? Rashi's question here is, why is the breastplate called the breastplate of judgment? What kind of judgment is going on here? So, Shemechaper al kilkul adin, the breastplate forgives and atones on the corruption of judgment. Meaning, davar acher, that means this is things which people are corrupt in judgment, the breastplate will atone for it. Another way of explaining it is, why is it called a judgment? Mishpat shemevarer dvarav v'aftachasei emes. It clarifies the words of the Kohen, and what it promises, it guarantees truth. Meaning, when they would ask, as the Choshen was used to ask the Kohen what God's will is of the Jewish people, they would be clarified through the words of the Choshen, through the breastplate. The idea is, Mishpat mishamish lashon l'shenis, shalish l'shenis. The word mishpat in Hebrew can be used in 3 different ways. It's said concerning the people who come to judgment in front of a court, divrei tainas balidin, when the plaintiff and defendant give their case and present their case in front of the judge, we find the word mishpat used, as God says, as it says in the Torah, Vayakev Moshe's mishpat, and Moshe brought their judgment in front of God. Ugemardin, judgment also can refer to the verdict, as we learned in the previous Torah readings, the mishpatim lisata mishpat, do not allow your verdict to be swayed, or as it says also in the book of Deuteronomy. And it also refers to v'oinashadin. It also refers to the actual judgment, not only the verdict that the judge says, but the verdict and the punishment that happens to the person who then is found guilty. In shmisam, whether it's a punishment of death or a punishment of lashes, in or a financial penalization, as we find the terminology is used, as we found previously in the book of in the Torah reading of Mishpatim, kamishpat, as the verdict or as the judgment which is adjudicated to this individual. This is what happens. So you see, the word mishpat can be either the actual complaint, the verdict, or the actual execution of the verdict. But over here, when we talk about the breastplate of judgment, mishpat, over here it's talking about clarifying and explaining the words that are being said. Kemase ephod, what does it mean that it should be made like the ephod? Using the same materials and the same tapestry. Verse 16, Ravuayeh, it will be a square, kaful, which is folded over, zeres arkei, a span long, the zeres rachbai, and a span wide. Rashi, zeres arkei v'zeres rachbai. This zeres that we're talking about over here, the measurement that we're referring to over here, is a half a amma. An amma is anywhere between 19 and 20 inches. So this is what the zeres is referred to over here. That's the span that we're talking about. Kaful, it's going to be folded. Mutaloi lefanav, in front of him, keneged liba, against this arch. Remember, v'hayu Aaron, that will be on the heart of Aaron. Tolu bekisves ha'ephod, so you can have it hanging by the strands over the shoulder straps of the ephod. Haboyis machoyev, that are coming from the back. Al kis ha'ephod, v'nikbolus v'yardus lefanav ma'at, and they come in front of him, as we explained, and they're folded a bit. Then v'achosh, and then the actual breastplate hangs from it. V'toli ben b'sharshav tabayis, are hung by strands and rings, as will be explained later when it talks about the details of the breastplate. So it was an actual item that this material was had one part and the back was folded behind. And as we're going to see, the Urim V'Tumim was then placed in between. This actual breastplate in the front will then have miluas oven arba turim. You will then set with gems mounted on it in 4 rows. 4 rows of stone. Tur, oidem pitita varekes. You're going to have 1 row which is going to have containing different stones, emerald, carnelian, emerald, and topaz, and that will be the first row. Hatura echad, which is going to be the first row. Rashi, verse 17. Umileisabai. Why does he say that you're going to fill them? Because the stones are going to fill these gold little inserts, inlets, settings that the stones will sit in. So therefore they're called filling stones. Therefore he calls them by the name of miluim, to fill. Mountings. Verse 18, Vatur Hasheni, and the second row, Noifech Sapir V'Yahalim. The second row will be carbuncle, sapphire, and diamond. If I pronounce the names incorrectly, I apologize. The third row, Vatur Hashlishi, and the third row, Leshem Shvoi V'Achlama. Zarkon, agate, and amethyst. Different kinds of names of stones, and there are different colors as well. Vatur Hashlishi, Tur Arvi, and the fourth row is going to be Tarshish Shoyam and Yoshvei, are going to be of stones of quagmire, onyx, and jasper. These are the 12 different kinds of stone that were used in the actual breastplate of the holy that the high priest would wear in the holy temple as well as in the tabernacle. All these stones, mushubatzim, had to be encased in a gold mounting. Were filled from the sides with this gold mounting around it. So it had a gold frame where in it the stone would sit inside, and that's why, as we mentioned previously, they were called miluim because they filled the actual gold spot. Rashi, Meshubatim Zav, all these rows will be filled with gold. Mukafim Mishpatzezav, they will be surrounded by gold frames. But the gold will be as deep as the size of the stone. And therefore, as we mentioned, it will be filled. They will be the size of the thickness of the stone. Should be the depth of the inserts, of the setting, not more and not less. It should be exactly fitted to the stone. Verse 21. V'ha'avanim, and on these stones, what are you going to do with these stones? Tial Shmeis B'nei Yisrael, the names of the Jewish people, the names of the tribes of the sons of Yisrael will be on them. Shtei Mesrei, which is 12. Al Shmeisam, all their names, by their name. Pituche Chaisam, each one should have his name engraved. Ish al Shmei, each person according to his name. Tiel Shnei Masar Shavat will go according to the 12 tribes. Rashi, Ish al Shmei, Keseder Toldesim, they'll go according to their birth. Seder Avanim, so too will be the order of the stones. Oidem, for example, the first stone that we mentioned previously, Oidem would be for Ruvain, Pitita for Shimon, V'chein Kulam, so too each one will go according to their birth. The interesting thing that you'll notice that over here, as well as on the Shoam stones, went according to the birth of the tribes, not according to their mothers. The Rebbe points out this is a symbol of unity, showing that they're all the children of Jacob, regardless of who their mother is, the unity of the Jewish people that was carried by the high priest. Verse 22, Vasis al choshen, and you shall then make on the choshen, shtei tabizov, 2 gold chains, 2 gold rings, Vasis al choshen, start again. Vasis al choshen is to make on the choshen, sharshris gavlus, 2 pure gold chains. You should make 2 pure gold chains braided like cords, and they will be attached to the side, gavlus, to the side of the breastplate. That means coming from the top of the breastplate, there were 2 gold chains that were coming from it on their edge. Rashi explains, ala choshen. What does it mean on the breastplate? Because it's going to hold the breastplate, to set them according to their rings, like will be explained in the next verse. Sharshes, the word sharshes comes from Lashon sharshe ilan, like the root of a tree. The same way the root of a tree, they hold the tree. To make sure it stays firm in the ground. Af elu, so to these they will be holding the breastplate, because it will be hung by the ephod, by the shoulder straps of the ephod. This is the two chains that we mentioned earlier that were attached to the settings that were on the ephod, on the shoulder straps of the ephod. There were two gold chains that would hang down, and they would then be the ones holding the breastplate in its place. Rashi now brings the opinion of Menachem ben Tzruk, where he, many times when it comes to translations and grammatical Hebrew, he mentions him. And over here he says that these two words, shar sharois, as well, and shar shois, are rooted in the same word. Lashin sharashim, they all come from the word root. For Amar sharesh, the extra resh that we had earlier when it was called shar sharois, and over here it's called shar shois, is because that there's sometimes an extra word mem in the actual word, which is that we find in other words as well. Where, for example, something that's empty, you'll go rake, but you can also say reikam. Shalosh is 3, and it can put shal shil shaim. But Rashi says, however, I do not see and I don't agree with him. Why? Because if you look in Hebrew, the word sharsheres that has the extra reish means a chain, like in the word of the Mishnah. However, sharshes, or it comes from the word shoiresh, root, and that's why over here Rashi says it's like the root of a tree, while previously he called it a chain. Gavlus, as we mentioned earlier, the word gavlus comes from the word gvul, like border. Migbalis umar l'mayla, it's the same word as migbalis, like we said before. Shetiskim et abois sheyude, you'll put these rings on the edge of the breastplate. V'chol gvul loshin katza. Anytime it says border, it means an edge. Masei aves, k'maisei kliya, meaning braided. You're going to take the gold and you're going to braid it and make it into a chain. Verse 23. And then you're going to make on the actual breastplate shtei tabeizov, 2 golden rings. These 2 rings will be at the 2 upper corners of the breastplate, which in them the chains will go, connecting them to the gold setting, which is on the ephod, hanging down in front of the kohen. For the need of the choshen, Rashi says, that they should be there. It doesn't seem right that you should put the actual rings on it to begin with. Why then does the Torah repeat it again and say, and you'll put these 2 rings on the edge of the choshen? If you already said that you made it part of the breastplate, so why do you have to say it again and you'll put these 2 rings there? Then it should have said at the beginning of the verse, you'll make on the edge of the choshen 2 rings. Why does it only say afterwards? Even when he talks about making these braided chains, you have to explain that it's talking about that it was made because of the breastplate, and then you will attach it later on the 2 edges of the choshen, through its 2 corners, towards the neck of, that means on the top of, you have the actual choshen that sits on the breast of the kohen. You have the top part of it which is facing his head, the bottom part of it which is facing the bottom. These 2 rings will be on the top facing the neck of the actual kohen. The 2 gold chains will be coming out of it, connecting to the shoulder straps and the settings which was of the ephod. And you're going to have them on the 2 corners, la'imanis v'lasmalis, to the right and to the left, haboyim ul ephod, which are going to be parallel and meet up with those shoulder straps of the ephod. Verse 24. And you're going to take these 2, you'll take those 2 gold braids that we mentioned earlier, and they're going to put them through the rings, which those rings are on the corner, the corner of the breastplate. Verse 25, verse 24, Rashi, these are the chains that we mentioned earlier. He didn't say where you're going to place them. So now the Torah tells us where you're going to put them in those rings, where they're going to place. These are the same chains that he mentioned previously. How does Rashi know that? Because if you look later on in the Parshas Pekudei, when Moshe then dresses the Kohen and talks about the items that were made, it only mentions it once. That means these two chains are the same two chains that the Torah mentioned previously that will be made on the edge of, that will be placed in the rings, which were on the corners of the breastplate. Verse 25, and then you'll attach the two ends of the two braids. Titin al shtei mispetzeis, they will go onto the two gold settings. V'nasat al kisves ha'efod al mulpanav, those are going to go and attach to the front of the shoulder straps of the ephod, as we mentioned previously. And over here the Torah enumerates it clearly, where the two chains attach to the shoulder straps underneath the gold settings, which were on the front of the ephod, because the straps came from the back towards the front over his shoulder, holding the breastplate. Rashi, Vashtei ketzais, al shtei avaises, on those two braids of gold, shnei rashem shekol achas v'yachas, each head will be attached to another one. Titein al shtei mispetes, they will be placed in those gold settings. And this is what Rashi says, back to where he mentioned before that later on it will be explained clearly. Hein aksuvas l'mayla, these two gold settings that I told you were mentioned previously, this is what it's talking about. Bein parshas acheshin and parshas eifet, when we spoke about the two settings that were mentioned between the first verse that we learned today, between the ephod and the choshen, and if Pirush called Sarkan, and he didn't explain clearly what its purpose is going to be. Now the Torah tells us Ves Mekayman and its place. Va'achshav, now the Torah explains. Now that I told you that you made a choshen, you made rings in the choshen, you made these braided chains. Where are they going to be placed? On those gold settings that I mentioned earlier, that are going to be on the shoulder straps of the ephod. Now he tells us where we're going to put these gold chains, which are going to be in the gold settings, which were coming out of the rings from the breastplate. Liyaminu l'smol, to the right and to the left. Eitzel atzaver, towards the top, meaning towards the neck of the Kohen. Shnei rashi hasharsheres yamanis tekeya b'shemetz mitzvah shalimin. You have the two chains going into the right, into the square setting on the right. So you have the two chains. The way it worked, you had an actual chain that went through the ring. You have the two ends. The two ends would then connect into the gold setting that was on the ephod, that was sitting on the shoulder of the Kohen. Vinasata, this is not referring to the ropes. This is referring to mishpatzes, to the gold settings. Where would these gold settings be? Al kisves ha'ephod, on the shoulder straps on the ephod. Rashi continues, achas bezu va'achas bezu. You're going to have one gold setting to hold the chains on one shoulder strap and one on the other shoulder strap. Nimtzu, what do we have from here? Kisves ha'ephod, the shoulder straps of the ephod, machzikin es ha'choshen, are actually supporting and holding the breastplate in place. Shalipil, that it should not fall. Ubehen totally, and that's the way it was hanging. V'adayin tzvas ha'choshen ha'tachtonu, you still have the bottom of the choshen can still bang, because on the top it was connected, but it was still loose on the bottom. V'nei keshes al kreisen would be banging on the stomach of the Kohen. V'ein dvuka lo yofa, and it's not connected properly. Therefore, as we're soon going to learn in the verse, there were another two rings that were on the bottom that fastened it on the bottom, that would hold it tight, that it wouldn't bang around while he was walking. Al mul panav. It doesn't mean that it was by the face of the Kohen, because usually the word panav means face. Over here, it's referring to the face of the ephod, the front of the ephod. You're not going to put the gold settings in the back where the shoulder straps are coming, but they're going to be on the front, klapi me'il, where the shirt where the robe will eventually be worn. Well, it's going to be in the top, towards the front of the ephod, and therefore he calls it kumul panav shalefet kesa ever einanira in a panim. The back is not seen, so therefore it's not called the face of. The part that you see is called the face of, so therefore it's folded over onto the shoulder in the face, that you will be able to see it from the front. Verse 26, continuing with the laws pertaining to the breastplate. The asisa shtei tabeisov, as we mentioned, Rashi mentioned about the bottom two rings. Now you're going to make another two rings. You're going to put them on attach them to the corners of the breastplate. Asher el eved ever ha'efet baisa. which its edge of the face attached them to the lower corners of the ephod, of the breastplate, and which asher al aver ephod beisa, of its edge that faces the ephod. Meaning, because the lower edge of the breastplate faces the ephod, which is the apron part which goes to the bottom of the Kohen, so therefore that's the way it relates to that part, because it's facing the bottom, as Rashi explains. Rashi says, Al shnei ksei sacheshen, hein shtei peyesav, this is the two corners, ha-tachtoines, the bottom two corners. Remember, the top two corners had the golden chains, which were connected to their breastplate, to the ephod straps. Now, these are referring to the bottom ones, liyamin, the smell, to the right and the left. What does it mean, al sfaseh shaliver beyesav? So when the Torah over here is giving us two clues to be able to give us and understand where these two rings are going. Because I already put two rings on top, so now the Torah enumerates and tells me where am I putting these two rings now. What are the two signs? Number one, that it has to be at the bottom edge. How do I know it's the bottom edge? Because it has to be parallel towards the part of the apron. Because the top of the choshen, the top of the breastplate, is not against the ephod, because the ephod wasn't worn on the top. The ephod was only worn on the bottom. Because it was closer to the neck. The ephod nasan al masnaf, and the actual apron itself was on the hips of the Kohen. Another sign he gave, that these rings should not be on the outside, these rings were now placed on the inside. That means the rings on top you were able to see on the outside, and the chains were then connected to the shoulder straps. These rings were on the inside of the choshen, so you were not able to see the rings when you're facing the ephod, when you're facing the breastplate. It was behind it. As you recall, it was folded. So in that part, that's where the rings were. As Rashi continues to explain. That side was towards the apron, because then you had the actual strap of the ephod that the Kohen would wear. And this strap was then, the apron was then closed and through this strap on the hips of the Kohen, a little bit above his stomach, also from both sides. This was reached, the exact part of the choshen. So if you had the apron, you had the strap of the apron, you had the bottom part of the breastplate would be right on top of that apron and right by the strap of the apron, connecting them all together. Verse 27. Vasisa shtei tabesav, and you'll make two golden rings. V'nasatayis, and you'll place them al shtei kisveis ephod, on the two shoulders of the ephod, milmata, on the bottom, towards the lower edge. Mimul panav, towards the front. Where next to where it's going to be joined by the ephod's back. As the Torah continues, you're going to make them at the edge toward the two shoulder straps of the ephod, next to where they are joined above the belt of the ephod. So we're talking about the two straps now, which came from the back. Where did the two straps come from? They were right by the part of where the strap of the ephod of the apron went up. As Rashi explains as follows. Verse 27. Going back to these squares settings, they were placed on top of the shoulder straps on the top of it. That were opposite or parallel the throat of the Kohen. They would then be folded and come down before him. And now these rings that we're talking about here, these rings that we're referring to were put at the bottom of these shoulder straps. So you had the shoulder straps coming from the back of the Kohen, coming towards the front, where the front of them had the settings that the golden chains were hanging the choshen. On the bottom of those straps, the bottom of it meaning where it would be connected by the apron of the strap of the apron, over there you would put two rings. That would be connected to the ephod. And that's why it says, meaning that those rings should be next to the place of where it's connected. The place where you connect the apron and the sash and the strap of the apron to are connected. Right below the strap, but connected to the shoulder straps that are connected. Because that connection was right parallel to where the strap was. These were put a little bit higher where the shoulder straps would be coming out from. So if you have the picture would be, you have the apron on the bottom, which is sitting on the hips of the Kohen. Around it was a strap which would connect and hold the apron in place. Above it from the back would be coming out two shoulder straps that would go on top of the shoulders of the Kohen. On the bottom of those shoulders, right above the strap which was connected to the apron, that's where those two rings would be placed, which would be exactly parallel to the end of the Choshen, which was in the front. Then he would put a turquoise thread through those rings, and it would go through the rings of the Choshen as well, and connect them with that thread, to the right and to the left. The purpose of this was so that the bottom of the Choshen shouldn't be flapping back and forth on the stomach of the Kohen. So it would be sitting nicely on the robe which was underneath the Choshen. Because it was tied to the back of the apron, so it would be fastened well, so it wouldn't move while the Kohen would walk. Mimul panav, what does mimul meaning on the outside part of the me'il, so you'd be able to see it. It wasn't on the inside, it would be facing the robe. Verse 28, V'yirkesu es hachoshen. The point is that they shall now link the bottom of the choshen, of the breastplate, mitaboisav, from its rings, al tabis ha'efet, to the rings of the apron, b'psil techelas, with this turquoise string that we mentioned that Rashi spoke about, liyais ha'chesha ve'efet, so this way it should be remain situated on the belt of the ephod, and the choshen, the breastplate, should never be removed, should never come loose from the ephod. And this is actually a negative commandment that the Rambam enumerates, one of the 365 negative commandments, that the choshen always has to be attached to the ephod. Rashi, v'yirkesu, loshin chibur, the word yirkesu means to be attached. V'chein, we find this in other places, Baruch Za'ish, Chibure Chevle Rishoyim, V'chein Harakasim Levika, when it talks about the mountains that were next to the valley, Harimas Muchim Zelazeh, She'ef Shalated Legai, one was not able to go into the valley, Shebeneim, between them, Al Bakushi Gadol, because very difficult, Mitech Smichosam, because the mountains were very close to one another, Hagai Sfuka Amuka, Therefore, because, however, when the Jewish people went back that way, it was a very smooth land and it was easier for them to go. So you see the word rechosim libika means connected close to the valley, proving his point that the word v'yirchasu means to connect. That the choshen should always be connected to the belt of the ephod. Yizach, loshen nituk, should never be disconnected. Loshen arvi, this is from an Arabic language. Hu kedivrei dunash ben lebrat. This interpretation is according to the commentator, the fellow Dunash ben lebrat. As we mentioned, there were two people who Rashi refers to with the grammatical and translations, which was Dunash ben lebrat and Menachem ben Sruk that we mentioned previously. Verse 29. And Aaron will then carry the names of the Jewish people, with the breastplate of judgment, alibay on his heart at all times, when he enters into the tabernacle, so this should be a constant remembrance, lifnei Hashem tamid, constantly in front of God. Verse 30. And now you're going to place into the choshen, into that fold. If you recall, we mentioned that the choshen was made of a woven tapestry, where there was a front and then it was folded in the back. What are you going to place into that fold? As urim v'satumim, the urim and the tumim. V'hoyu alev Aaron, this will always be on Aaron's heart. But ovay lifnei Hashem, when he comes before God, v'nosa Aaron es mishpatin, will carry the judgment of Bnei Yisrael, of the Jewish people. Alibay on his heart, lefnei Hashem, in front of God, tamid, constantly. Rashi, esa urim v'satumim. What does this mean, the urim and the tumim? The Choshen itself was not the Urim V'Tumim. Hu Ksav Shema Mafurish. It was the name of God, God's holy name that was written on that was placed in that fold of the breastplate. The reason why it was called Urim V'Tumim, Urim comes from the word Meir, would enlighten his words, umitamim is Dvarav, and they would make his words real, sincere, pure. This was why it was called the Urim V'Tumim, because it would make the words complete and illuminate the words that were needed. However, Rashi tells us, in the second holy temple, where there was the breastplate, however, it's impossible. A Kohen is not allowed to wear not allowed to wear only some of the garments. He has to wear all the garments. Though he had the breastplate, and he was wearing the breastplate, the actual Urim V'Tumim was missing in the second temple. Because of the writing that was inside, because of the God's name that was written in there, that's why it was called the Choshen of judgment. Because we find that they would ask in the judgment of the Urim, which was when Moshe needed something, or when Yeshua went out to war, it said he asked the Mishpat Urim, the judgment of the Urim. That's why it was called the Choshen Mishpat. Esa Mishpat B'nai Yisrael. What does it mean, the judgment of the Jewish people? Something that they are judged about. Something which is current, a question, and they need to know, should they or shouldn't they do any of the following? Well, according to the Medrash, because the breastplate would forgive on those who corrupt a judgment, Nikra Mishpat, it was called judgment, because it would forgive those who pervert or corrupt the judgment. This concludes the second Torah reading for Parshas Tetzaveh.